we should try and build up and gain strength from our partners around the world. The media have covered the subjects to tell whether or not the movement has been successful and whether the movement has still playing a part. So we have to look at it from an international perspective. In many countries that are here today, there were major political changes at the top level of government, the new sort of movements of resistance. Yesterday, like today. Today, we're going to listen to new movements, a new generation of movements. Many of those who will be with us today were also with us way back in the past. With others, we've been working for years in the European and World Social Forum and in the many sort of campaign that have been undertaken by the No Global anti-globalization movement. Today, we will talk together with other activists who at the time of Porto Alegre, Genoa, weren't yet born or were very young and who are now the protagonist of the new kind of struggles, ongoing struggles. I will ask the same question to all of you, just one single question. It's the same question we asked ourselves yesterday. If we're split and divided, we go nowhere. We lose, we don't win. So to our today's guest, we'll ask the following question: how can we restore a connection, a common area, a welcoming space, a viable space that will reconnect these struggles which are ongoing, alternatives and projects for change? This is the question we ask you to answer. We have subdivided the assembly in many sessions on the basis of different themes. The question is always the same, but we have put together the people on the basis of a specific team. So I give now the floor to Piero Bernocchi, who's going to introduce the first session. They want me to fall whilst I'm live. I want to greet all of our guests. With many of them, we met elsewhere in the European fora, in the international fora. As Raffaella said earlier on, yesterday, we tried to sort of restart a process of coalition similar to that of Genoa in the past. That we've also somehow contested the reading that the Italian press has given of the No Global movement, as if everything had been focused on Genoa, and that is that repression has defeated. We reminded everyone that the movement in Italy started from Genoa, but has grown considerably at territorial level after Genoa. Many of the people that are here today have participated in the first European Forum in 2002 in Florence. Times considered the largest mobilization of all times, which brought 160 people, 160 countries with 100 million people participating. The No Global movement has continued growing in the world and has had an impact on general policies. In Latin America, it was the most important element to change the governments and replace the fascist governments to more progressive government and try to change the state of affairs in North Africa. We have to consider the importance of the social fora of Tunis on the Arab Springs. Then over the last 2 years, we've come to a standstill. We were at a standstill because of the pandemic. That is why today we try to ask a question to all the speakers of this assembly that I would like to emphasize and explain. The pandemic has once again showed that it is vital for us to make a systemic alternative, a global alternative, stronger and visible, and how we are interdependent on our planet. We have had a major fragmentation in geographic terms. Now, there is a danger that we go back to normal state of things, which would be worse than in the past. How can we reconstruct the movement as an alternative for a global alternative? The first two speakers will respond to this question, and I will give you the names of those who are going to speak the floor. The first one is Zé Correa from Brazil. He's an activist, he's a teacher, a writer. He's one of the founders of the World Social Forum of Porto Alegre. He's part of the Coletivo 160 in Brazil. He's one of the founders of the Global Dialogue, a group that was mentioned by Rafaela, that promotes a dialogue for new convergence against globalization. The second speaker is Nandita Shah Aksara, one of the organizers of the Social Forum in Mumbai in 2004, who is now the director of the Sana Center for Human Rights. The third speaker is Kamal Labib from Morocco. He's an activist for democracy, and is president of the Forum for Alternatives in Morocco. Is one of the leading promoters of the Social Forum in the Maghreb, and is one of the organizers of the two World Social Fora that had great success in Tunis in 2013 and 2015. The fourth speaker is from Europe. We have Natasha Theodorakopoulos, Greek. She's the only one that was in Genoa in 2001. There was a large Greek delegation. It was the largest of all the foreign delegations at that time in Genoa. She was part of the group that has promoted and organized all the social fora, namely the one in Athens in 2006. She speaks on behalf of the Party of the European Left. She's been working with them and has conducted a number of international campaigns to protect Greece. So that's just a short presentation that I could give you.
Bom dia, companheiras e companheiros.
Good morning. Good morning, comrades. It's an honor to talk to you in this day, which is so meaningful. The process of contemporary left was made possible thanks to the Zapatista uprising and the protest against the World Trade Organization in 1999, which generated a no global movement, the process of the World Social Fora, the counter summits, and the mobilization, such as that of Genoa, against the invasion of Iraq by the United States and England the following year in 2001. These were the most important and meaningful results. We're now talking about the founding process of the left and what is the left today. We have to consider two specific areas. First of all, the motto, the slogan of the World Social Forum. Another word is possible, necessary, and urgent. This means that we have to connect this concept to a central point, which was developed by the Zapatista movement, a word that we wish to develop. It's a word where many other words find their place. And also that the anti-globalization can be obtained on the basis of a plural convergence between all the fights which are anti-systemic fights. The mobilization of Genoa in 2002 and the protest against the invasion of Iraq, a part of a new political culture that 20 years later we have to assess in its meaning, its legacy, what is left of it. So I'd like briefly to summarize the points I wish to talk about on the basis of three questions. We have built a new agenda together. All the movements that participated in these processes have built a new agenda, which is an agenda capital versus labor and anti-imperialism, which prevailed in the 20th century. Far greater complexity, the socio-environmental fight, the women's fight, the anti-racist fight, the fight against homophobia, the fight of the indigenous people that have no state, the protection of common goods, and the shift of the center of gravity of our fight from the process of production to the process of reproduction. And the question of the care, which means that we have before us a far broader-based program, a broader-based agenda, which is more in keeping with the reality of today. So we must be connected to all these issues. We have to emphasize the centrality of the fight for autonomy of these social movements and the environmental movements with respect to the process of states and governments, which have always attempted to take advantage of the fights and exploit those struggles and deprive them of their potential. From the movement Black Lives Matter to the word climate strike to the other strikes and the uprising of the indigenous populations, we have a new political culture with a new language, a language which is inspired by eco-socialism, cross-cutting dimension, good, and the care. This is a new political method, quite different from that of the left in the 20th century. We have to build convergences of light, of struggles, in keeping with pluralism, diversity, internationalist solidarity without hierarchies, which stifle protest. The pandemic results into a sort of catalysis of the political projects which are being contested and confronted with conservatism, which is nationalist, neo-fascist, xenophobic, and racist, confronted with the neoliberal globalist cosmopolitanism, which tries to restart the process after following a process which would lead us to a new society. I think we're all partners of this process, a process which results into the struggle for human emancipation. I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity of sharing with you these few words, and I wish the very best for the success of this important event and this initiative. Thank you.
Ringraziamo Correa.
We'd like to thank Correa that has kept within the time allotted, and now we have Nandita. You have the floor. 5-6 minutes at most.
I'm so honored to be here in this important gathering, and it's a privilege to be with so many activists and friends from the World Social Forum. So thank you very much. The mobilization in Geneva was the biggest in the history, with people from all walks of life marching against the idea of capitalist globalization as symbolized by the G8. 20 years on, the rift between the rich and poor is being driven deeper, and the battle to control the world's resources has intensified. Green forces, an ideology or neoliberal economics, right-wing religious fundamentalism has posed a tremendous challenge, as it has led to a fragmented world and fragmentation in the progressive social movements. The last year has been full of added challenges. No country was spared from the COVID-19 pandemic or the related economic, healthcare, educational challenges, and issues of climate change have become even more acute. This crisis of COVID-19 has highlighted the same questions more strongly about the sustainability of global capitalisms that were asked in 2001. While we commemorate the anniversary of G8 demonstrations, we need to revisit our vision, strategies, and examine our dilemmas and chart new paths. And vision needs to recognize the interplay between the patriarchy, racism, capitalism in the context of imperialism that we have been saying for many years. I believe that the borders and fault line between the nations, the classes, sexualities, religion, and disabilities are real, and that our vision will have to envision the change and social justice work across these lines of demarcations and divisions. Our transformative vision will have to have an intersectional approach as a whole and a deeper analysis as necessary condition for shared empowerment. Our vision needs to challenge and compete with that of the far right and evolve alternative way of living, relating, building our world. More than ever, we are forced to think of local and global and vice versa. For this to happen, we need to recognize diversity and pluralism not as problems to overcome, but as conditions to be promoted and protected. We need to resist any hegemonic claim about any one way of thinking, at the same time actively and successfully promoting the convergence of differences and increasingly dialogue across differences. Secondly, the future of the movement relies on the possibility of bringing together a dialogue of multiple interests and multiple identities, searching for alternatives together. In this perspective, the tensions and differences and disagreements are experiments in bringing the new content of radical democracy, and we should not be afraid of them. We also need to recognize as changing reality in the last 20 years, the new generation, new subjectivities, and new possibilities of relating between the movements have emerged. During COVID-19 lockdown, the reach of the internet has become even deeper, posing challenges, but as well as providing us new opportunities. Acts of protest are no longer limited by the immediate spatial environment. If a dissident event is picked up by the global media network, it has a potential to transgress the street of every other city in the world. Protests can acquire almost immediate transnational dimension. No one could believe that Me Too could generate so much impetus all over the world as an issue that women's movement had been raising for so many years. It was unprecedented. But then spread of fake news and manipulation of algorithm has also shown us a huge threat determining our way of thinking and expressing. We have to create new ways to invent ourselves on these platforms, especially in post-COVID era. As Walden Bellows says, progressive must not fear to see what they can learn from the extreme right, especially when it comes to the politics of charisma, and see how our values can be advanced or promoted in a passionate and charismatic ways. I wish this gathering great potential not only for the Italian future, but for leading a new process of alter globalization in the world. Thank you very much.
E allora non avevano sentito, credo. Dicevo appunto che ringraziamo Nandita Shah per l'intervento.
Like to thank Alida Shah for her presentation. She fully respected her allotted time, and now we give the floor to to Camille Labib, Marco.
It's okay?
Please, Kamal.
Yes,
It's your time.
I'm here. Sorry, I thank you for the invitation. Sorry, but I will speak in French if you don't see any, si c'est possible. Is it possible?
Would it be possible for me to speak in French? Yes. You may speak in French. First of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation, for inviting Maghreb and to celebrate the victims of the Genoa summit. Now, the democratic process at the level of Maghreb is threatened. With special regards to the pandemic and the global health crisis, this has stressed the failure of the development policies. The ideologies, be they socialist or pan-Arabic or others, the post-colonial ideals and the consequences of the crisis, which have been opened up by the economic liberalizations and the management systems of the predators. So I'm not going to give you further details on this. What I would like to say is with the Hirak in Algeria, which is in its second year of activity, with the worsening of the crisis between Morocco and Algeria, on the conflict, not only the Saharan conflict, but this is also a conflict which related to whether one country or the other is dominating on the other, not to speak about the chaos in Libya. And what we're especially keen on is the political scenario in Tunisia, which is going through a structural, political, economic, social crisis, and which is also going through a major crisis because of the pandemic, which is calling on international solidarity to overcome this situation. Now, today, as a social movement, we are all facing up to what to do. In other words, how to address the challenges that we need to address. How can we overcome this crisis of values, which is calling on a breaking away from conservatism with the religious conflicts and religious faiths, which has to do with one's own individual ideals, and the respect of collective and individual freedom. Today in Morocco, and especially we have the condemnation of two journalists, one for 5 years and the other 6 years, two young journalists, and they have been condemned. And we also are facing the scandal of intelligent scandal that we all know with regards to the software hackers. So today we also have to face the crisis of the political structures. So we have to break away with the traditional structures of the 70s left policies, which is still strongly influencing our own way of doing things, and how to do this breakaway with the hegemonism and the single ideal. And then the third point is how are we going to go about the actions? So the political discourse that we have to develop when we're facing up a new generation which in Maghreb and in the Mediterranean area has to have to face all these movements like religious extremism and the migrants. And so how are we going to go about facing all these challenges? Now, of course, there's no other option with regards to Maghreb, at least, and that is the social movement is a movement which does not have a structure. So how can we find a connection between the spontaneous movement of the peoples of the region and the political power for us to bring about a basic change of the systemic structures. So this fragmentation of the movements as of today, we still did not find adequate solutions in Algeria, in Tunisia, or in Morocco, and even less in Libya, where there's a total chaotic situation. So how can we today overcome this fragmentation with new policies, new programs, new procedures, methodologies, which have to be consistent and which can bring about the progressive recovery of the social movements which have to tie in with the tradition of the major people's struggles for us to develop the new political system to which we are subject to. Thank you.
Merci bien, Kamal. E...
Thank you, Kamal. Natasha. So,
bonjour, vous m'écoutez? Alors, bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good morning, everyone.
Je tiens tout d'abord à remercier
First of all, I'd like to thank
les camarades italiennes
the
qui,
Italian comrades
avec beaucoup de travail,
that have been
dans
working
des
very
conditions
hard
extrêmement difficiles,
under
ont
very
réussi
difficult conditions,
une tâche difficile.
have accomplished
Donc aujourd'hui la possibilité
so
de
much.
tous ensemble,
So
parfois en
giving us the
personne,
opportunity of being gathered together, partly in person and partly in remote.
de nombreux camarades qui je n'ai pas vu, que je n'ai pas vu
I would like to express the wish to see many comrades that I haven't met for quite some time.
Il est difficile pour moi de réaliser
It's
que
difficult
se sont écoulés depuis notre
for me to understand how long has been the period that separates us from the time we met in Genoa and the current time.
Une expérience unique et une grande école.
Genoa has been a unique experience.
Différemment. Nous avons réalisé qu'il était possible de travailler ensemble.
Realized that it was possible to work together.
Aussi avec ceux qui ne sont pas d'accord.
Not only with those that are like-minded, but also with those that have a different view. So this has made it possible for us to learn to be tolerant and to think in terms of common action as movements.
Et donc, nous devons travailler systématiquement.
We must work systematically to try and give greater value to diversity.
D'une période d'excellente coopération entre les mouvements européens.
In the past, there was an excellent level of cooperation between the various European movements.
Cependant, ce cycle
est
accompli.
This is a time which is now finished. Well, we have to look at what we are confronted with today, that is the pandemic and the different problems. We know and realize that we have to restart from a different perspective. After 20 years, we know that not only do problems still exist that haven't been solved, but experience has taught us that it's not possible to solve the problems single-handed. There is no hope unless we join forces in an international level. We have to ensure that there is a permanent and effective ongoing communication between all of us. What will be the sort of cooperation that we can envisage in this new phase? We need to be all together.
Les valeurs qui nous ont inspirés dans
the values which inspired us in the past,
la solidarité,
the value of solidarity, peace, justice, social justice,
reste toujours actuel aussi bien que les slogans des ans avant.
Quite valid and important, central, quite apart from the slogans.
Si la logique du profit l'emporte, il n'y aura pas d'avenir pour l'humanité.
If profit motives will prevail, there won't be any future for the for humankind. So we have to ensure that we can prove that we are doing what is right and necessary. Thank you for listening to my brief remarks. And thank you for this opportunity to get in touch with all of you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the speakers on this first session. Let's move to the second session. It's an important session. Today we can only mention it. It's a session which focuses on Europe, which is our home. It should be our common home, but without the walls and inequalities, lack of rights. It's a huge struggle that we have to all carry out all together. I'll stop at that. And I'd like to call upon our speakers for this session that should stick to the time envisaged. But I'd like to mention here a dream and a project. Well, next year will be 20th anniversary of the Florence Social Forum. So we have to think in terms of trying to get together in Florence next year to deal with the questions of Europe and the social actors. So this is a project that we can sort of dream of and think of implementing. The first speaker of this session in Europe is Christophe Aguiton. He needs no introduction. He was with us at all times, at all the most important times of our past and current history. He has been amongst those that have developed the World and European Forum, and is also the coordinator of the global movement. And Christophe, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure for me being here today. I would like to give my greetings to all the other speakers with whom we commonly share so many issues. I feel like at home because in Genoa, we've gone through such a major experience that we've developed very deep, strong ties which go beyond time and that will be with us for the rest of our lives. Let me now address the issue that is the reason why we're here for. So the pandemic and what does this mean for us and for the social movements? Well, first of all, I think that this pandemic, like all major health crisis or major global crisis, is surfacing the best part is doctors, so which has led to something really amazing. Free access, the genomes of the virus are being studied on by European, Asian, African, international scientists. And this is an unprecedented cooperation, which clearly shows to what extent, in terms of humanity, the hopes that we may have for the future. But likewise, always with regards to health, we also have the downside. So let's talk about vaccines. We all need vaccines for the global world, not only out of compassion, but for our own future, because unless we have a global vaccinations, variants will evolve, like we see today with the variant, and we will have more serious variants, which will affect all of us around the globe. Instead of trying to find free patents for these vaccines, so we see that pharmaceutical, the pharma companies are doing anything possible not to give all humans the best way to be protected against the virus. So if this is true for today, and this is also true for the future, because the pandemic is paving the way to new opportunities for new options. We had instances of solidarity which are unprecedented, especially in the first phase of the pandemic, and the awareness raising of the different relations between human beings and nature is global. By this I mean that we can no longer exploit the ecosystem in a reckless way as we've done so far, and we need to develop a new relation between nature and human beings with a more balanced relation between us all against any inequalities at national and international level. But likewise, this pandemic is also showing that the future can open up new doors or make it worse with inequalities and selfishness, which today is clearly seen. We can see this how the wealthy countries are giving themselves their priorities in terms of vaccines without giving Africa or other countries the same access to vaccines. And we see that in the alternatives, the two potentials do exist. And our task today, of course, is that we have to fight for a future which may be environmental, based on solidarity, and we must not allow for inequalities to further develop, barriers to develop. So what are we called upon to do today? Well, our strengths are clearly seen. Social movements have never been as important as of today. 2019, before the pandemic, has been seen as the year of protests and popular protests. So in Northern Africa, in Asia, in all countries, we have seen social movements which were unprecedented in 2019. And we see that in the post-pandemic area, these movements will be increasingly important. So there's not a moving back of these social movements, no way. Well, first of all, for the left-wing and progressive movements, we need to develop doctrines which have to be settled. So when it comes to social, environmental, feminism, and democratic issues, they should be further supported and enhanced. In Latin America, where the left wing is gaining power, or in Bolivia, after the coup d'etat, which was staged against Morales, or today in Peru and in other countries, there's a very strong tension, as we've seen in Peru, the link between environmentalism and social issues. So this program, this doctrine applies not only to Latin America, but also to other countries, which has to be given priority. And then the second point is that we have to dive into the international coordination activities and national activities. There has been a weakening in recent years. Now, struggles have been further enhanced, but why has there been a weakening? First of all, because of geopolitical reasons. 20 years ago, there were having common enemies makes the struggle all the more easier. Like with G7 in Genoa, it was very easier, and Seattle against the World Trade Organization. But today, everything is like kind of has come to a standstill, and it is more difficult to unify these social movements because we don't have a clear adversary to be identified. And then the second point, which explains why today it is more difficult to have an international coordination. There's a change in terms of the sociological aspect. Everything is based more on individuals rather than on groups. So we saw this in the spring Arab movement, and we know that this relevance, importance of the single individual is the reason why we're leveraging this social dialogue, because the single human being plays an increasingly important role, but then we have to better coordinate our efforts because all is based on a single human being. Coming back to what Rafaela was saying, meeting in November in Florence, that is a very good initiative. And slightly before November, in August 2022, the European University of Social Movements will be another opportunity to redevelop this European framework that we really need, and to give our common thoughts on setting up an international coordination structure that we and
Thank you so much. Let's move on with the next speaker. I'll give the floor to Heinz Beerbaum, is a leader of the party La Link, is the president of the Party of European Left. So I'd like to thank them because they enabled us with the support they gave us to organize this. Thank you.
Perfetto. Heinz sta entrando, ricordo a tutti per favore di
I'd like to ask you all to please stick to the 5-minute limit because we have so many people that will take the floor. Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to warmly greet all participants from the European left. Today, we have the 20th anniversary of the Genoa Forum, which has been brutally eliminated by state bodies. Well, it's important to recall this today, especially at a time when the pandemic has shown clearly the failure of a neoliberal policy and a capitalist growth. We are confronted with a situation where social inequality is growing all over the world, especially in the southern part of the world. The slogan of the Social Forum, another word is possible, was appropriate and correct 20 years ago, and it still is appropriate. It's even more relevant today in view of global challenges such as climate change. What is needed is a radical change in our policies. We need sustainable development. We need to have a social, ecological transformation of our economy. Insofar as Europe is concerned, what is now being discussed is the future of Europe. According to our own major beliefs, we need a radical change, political change in Europe. The central aspects have to do with the protection of the population with respect to the consequences of the pandemic, strengthening of social rights, the protection of democracy, and a commitment to disarmament and peace. We, as European left, consider the 20th anniversary of the Forum of Genoa is a further commitment on our part to strengthen our efforts to build another Europe, a more social, more democratic, more environmentally friendly Europe. I know that the current crisis, the major disruption, political and social disruptions, are not very much in favor of such goals. This situation also gives opportunities to the left to disseminate an alternative policy. Since the failure of the neoliberal policy, it's quite obvious. So let's not miss such opportunities. The 20th anniversary of the Forum of Genoa, as I said, it's still a further commitment to strengthen our cooperation with all the forces that are committed to build a new word, a different word. The yearly European Forum should become a new platform for the cooperation between all the progressive forces. We are on good terms with the Forum of Sao Paulo in Latin America. We are sort of related with a number of international cooperations organizations. So to strengthen, and we must further strengthen the cooperation between all social movements in the world. Not only is a different word possible and urgently needed. Thank you. Thank you so much, Heinz. You speak very good Italian. Thank you. We now have a key speaker. We now are going to have Dražen, who represents Možemo. Možemo, it's an experiment of coalition of different forces that a few months ago won municipal elections in Zagreb and has elected a mayor. Zagreb. We're very happy to welcome you.
Thank you all.
Met the activists elsewhere.
Thank you all, and I'm really honored to be here because I was in Genoa 20 years ago as a much younger person, and this really brings me back to my journey, what we are doing now, and also to reflect on this continuity of our activism and our struggle for a better world. So to answer on this main question, and comparing with what we had 20 years ago, my opinion is that basically because of system crisis, capitalism crisis, COVID-19 crisis, all the challenges that we had 20 years ago today are just more intensified. I'm not a pessimist. I see many good things in our movement, but the problem that we are facing today are much more, you know, interconnected and much more intensified than 20 years ago. So according to this, as a global movement for justice, for peace, for sustainability, for real system change, I think we also have to interconnect all of our struggles and positive outcomes, positive things, and give this one unite answer, no matter on our differences in some kind of, you know, specific points, areas where we are working on things like that. Why I'm thinking like this? Because basically I'm also a teacher, and whenever I teach on global issues, sustainability, system crisis in Croatia and here in Balkan region, people are pretty much, you know, fed up with the criticism of this system. They are pretty much aware what is wrong and that this system doesn't satisfy people's needs and putting in danger balance of ecosystems and how it will affect us. People are in real need of some concrete answers and positive alternatives, and that is why I think that we have to focus now on local level, on a regional level, on national level, and of course on international and global level. And while doing this, we should never forget of you know, being on the streets, of pushing for solutions, for changes, organizing protests, but also to work on daily basis in our local communities to spread these positive and concrete alternatives, and to show people that there are better worlds in food production, in energy systems, in culture, in home care, in better relationship among among people, regardless of their, color of skins or this kind of differences. So that is, I think, what we need to focus, and of course, as much as we can to initiate changes in policy level, as we are happy now that we are now doing in Zagreb and across Croatia. Thank you for your time, and I will stay and participate in the program.
Grazie tantissimo, Brian.
Thank you. You're really sending us a message of hope. And now Cornelia Hildebrand co-chairs Transform Europe. There's no need to introducing her. We all know this movement. Thank you, Cornelia, for being here with us today. Thank you.
Many thanks to speaking here and for the invitation. I think the most important lessons of the Genoa protest is to understand the fundamental change in capitalism and to respond to them politically. How can we ensure the sustainability of protest and develop new forms of organizing transnational protest? How to organize in a way that preserves the capacity for innovation of new transnational organizations? The anti-globalization movement at the end of the 90s emerged in a new phase of capitalist development, new information and communication technologies, a fundamental change in global production, globalized production chains secured by new transnational financial, economic and trade agreements with new institutions like WTO, and the free trade agreement such NAFTA in 1994 and the multilateral agreement of investment. Protest formed against this development. First, the Zapatista protest against NAFTA, the worldwide movement against multilateral agreement of investment, and a successful struggle. These were among the precursors of the protest in Genoa in 2001. It was based on the protest against the WTO, G8, later G20, against the policies of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. New organizations emerged like ATTAC, and new forms of organizing stood like the World and the European Social Forums. But while the social forums and also organizations like ATTAC have lost their most important role, the experiences of such organizations, the experiences of Seattle, of Genoa, Florence, Paris, London, Athens, and Istanbul, and of course Porto Alegre, were carried on. These experiences were developed in the protest against the austerity policy of the Troika. New social movement, political actors with new party project emerged and led to the one left-wing government in Europe, in Greece. The problem was that the national strength of this protest met a European left was only able to mobilize in the countries of the South. That was not enough. European actions like general strikes in Spain and Portugal and action in other countries were the exception. This included later in 2016 the fight against TDIP. Of course, the Syriza struggle was a European struggle against the policy of memoranda, against the institution of the Troika. This struggle showed the strength of Syriza at the national level and the weakness on the European left. Therefore, at the European level, solidarity with Syriza remained symbolic. This showed that we need a new forms of transnational mobilization and organizing. During the period of the anti-austerity protests, women's movement also developed. In Spain, for example, the women's movement called for a feminist general strike. Women's protests against the tightening of abortion regulation were unmistakable, were much broader than the traditional and new left. That was also the case later in Poland. In 2018, the ecological struggle took on a new meaning with Friday for Future. Today, 20 years after Genoa, are we not in a situation of the fundamental change? Are we not again at the crossroad of capitalism in the face of the looming climate catastrophe, in the face of the war and destruction and global pandemic and the new upheavals of production and lifestyle through digitalization? Global challenges require global struggles for global social and democratic rights for every human being. What does it mean for the left in Europe? The European Social Forum, the great open space of reflection and alternative practices, have their continuation in thematic forums. However, these no longer have the significance of the forum as an open space of diversity. That means we need a new start, a restart, with new and with the knowledge of all experiences and failures. One step for the political left in Europe could be to open the European Forum to social movements and actors of civil society. Why not to expand this forum to include an agora of civil society's actor? That would make the forum more attractive for a broader social left. We need new forms of international cooperations. We need forms of co-op 26. We need unifying projects that reflect the diversity of protest and struggles against today's capitalism. Right to Secure could be one. The cooperation to co-op 26, it's another one. We should develop such kind of projects. Many thanks.
Sí, Fernanda, por favor, tú puedes hablar.
Fernanda, you can speak. Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to greet you from Spain. Can I start? Good day from Spain. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be with you to share this important event. The pandemic of COVID-19 has shown the number of problems that we have covered in the past, the fragility of these current societies and the destruction of ecosystems and natural resources. The prevailing model is a productivity. In the past, we tried to envisage a different sort of green capitalism, industry 4.0. The coronavirus crisis has sort of resulted into frustrations, injustices, inequalities, lack of opportunities, and loss of social and human rights. So these are a number of actions that we should undertake to ensure that we can come to a solution of some problems. Our movement must remain very active and proactive. Just talking about the hope for change, we are fighting. There are many people that are struggling and are trying out the new alternatives for economic growth and to achieve a more sustainable, more democratic approach, because we should take our destiny in our hands. the social movement should be the element that brings together all the democratic processes that sort of promotes participation and solidarity to come up with very concrete solutions. It's important that we work all together. The role of the young people and women is key. It's important to have sort of change a generation, considering the fact that there are many social and political conflicts which are becoming even more severe. In Europe, we consider that it's extremely urgent to establish a cooperation of all the progressive forces, cooperating in a world and European campaign, and ensure that there is a full participation of the social movement in planning a number of events that should be involving social civil society and the left-wing parties. We have to work on something that will not be a one-size-fits-all solution of all the problems that we are confronted with. We're going to have this European University that will be held to discuss with the activists from all over the world and from Europe to share our knowledge. The next meeting will be in 2021. We had to postpone this meeting in 2022. It's a very major challenge for us. Another word is possible, and this gives us the strength to pursue our struggle. We must be successful. We must win. So I give you all my solidarity and embrace you all.
Thank you, Fernanda. We'll see you soon at the next meeting organized by the ATAC Europe. Now, the last speaker of this session is Manon Aubry, who co-chairs the Parliament, the left group of the European Parliament. And thank you for your help because they have funded the interpretation costs of this event. So thank you very much for your contribution.
Buongiorno, je vais parler en français parce que je vous ai dit à peu près tout l'italien que je connais, même si je vous salue. Juste de l'autre côté de la
France. Buongiorno. We are closer to Genoa, geographically speaking. I am part of this generation who was a child at the G8 forum. I was 11 at the time. So I'm part of that generation who has grown with this movement. And I was grown with this idea that we're getting to an economic model which was spreading around the world. And in the aftermath of this economic and social crisis and health crisis, we now have come up with the same evidence of a liberal model, which has its flaws, and it has also stressed all its weaknesses, the environmental crisis, with ozone worsening because of the climate change repercussions, which growing evidence around the globe. And this crisis has also been a crisis of globalization with the deregulation of exchange which has serious repercussions. In Europe, there's been a moment where we were not even wearing these face masks, and we see the rich have become richer. They have reached unprecedented peaks. Today, we see people who are so rich that they are flying these space stations, whereas in other countries, the situation is in dire straits. And I also think that we are going through a crisis of democracy. When it comes to the health crisis, there has been the development of authoritarian liberalism in Eastern Europe countries, and also in other countries where Macron has been acting as the one of the representatives of authoritarian liberalism. So we have a multifaceted crisis, and we have the same dogmas. So we know that the economy is collapsing, and we see that a number of countries, European countries, have been trying to counteract and beef up this economic system, but the tendency is to go back to the old systems, economic models, which are not giving any importance to the social or environmental issues. And the US are even ahead of us, which has developed an economic recovery plan, which is even stronger than the one in Europe. So how are we going to go about with our methodology to be developed to counteract all these negative effects? Well, first of all, we need someone who has to tear apart the barriers between the countries and the peoples. We need to have new social mobilizations or movements in the decision-making process. This is the only way to break this economic system, because these systems are taking advantage of this disaffection, and the European group, which I co-chair with Martin Chidelman, is trying to do this, give a new momentum to the political mobilization movements. And your initiative is very important and it's very apropos because of this. We need a society which has developed a new harmony between human beings and nature, and the European movements with the protests, the social movements, and the political forces to defend a political agenda which has to address a climate change crisis, and which is another extremely important issue. We're very sorry not to be physically present today, but we hope sometime in the future this will be possible. And thank you for the political struggle you are fighting for, and I'm fully part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all those who spoke for this session. I now give the floor to Alfio Nicotra, who's going to be in charge for a short session. This is the session on social movements promoting democracy. We originally had planned to have many countries participating. We selected one symbolic country that we're very close to. We have organized demonstrations against the war in Iraq in the European Social Forum. We started in 2003. We start from Iraq. Batul Karim Hamdi, it's a representative of the Iraqi Social Forum. Prior to the pandemic in Iraq, boys and girls have been doing a wonderful job, but there were many victims, over 600 people that have been killed by the militias and the repressive forces of the Iraqi government. But this is an extraordinary movement which can teach us a good lesson. Batu Karim Hamdi, are you there? Are you there? I'll give you the floor. Are you there, Batu? I can see you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Batul Karim Hamdi, and today I'm going to speak on behalf of the ISF, the Iraqi Social Forum. First of all, we're very honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And the ISF is actually sending you its warmest greetings, and thanks you very much for giving us this opportunity to talk through this digital frame that's imposed on us by the circumstances of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, what happened, and this pandemic makes us think, all of us, in a practical way to find an alternative to the global system, an alternative that is much clearer and much in solidarity, especially with the people and the countries who are afflicted by economic crisis, social crisis, and also political and humanitarian ones. Of course, due to the domination that is imposed on us by the forces of exploitation, forces of oppression, in addition to the false policies pursued by the regimes. Now, undoubtedly, talking about the democratic experience in post-2003 Iraq is a very complicated matter and a very delicate one for several reasons. Now, and one of the most prominent one is that democracy was not exactly the product of the Iraqi environment and the Iraqi circumstances. Rather, it was an immature experience that was extracted and derooted from a different environment, and then it was exported back to Iraq, to the Iraqi interior, at a time when the people only wanted to overthrow the dictatorship of that time in as minimum losses as possible. And then maybe later on, they wanted to start building the democracy that they have been dreaming of, and they were deprived from for such a long time. Now, what happened in April 2003 was a shock from which the Iraqis did not exactly recover, even nowadays, and its effects are still very much present today. Now, despite the fact that the experiment was based on completely wrong statements promoted by the United States governments, with the pressure and the embarrassment that happened to them, and they were subjected to after the failure and the justifications for the occupation of Iraq. And then they started adopting some sort of political class, and this political class that came to rule Iraq, it was supported by imperialist powers that did not know anything about how to run politically or to take a political action. And this was actually manifested in the nature and the form of the political system that was based on sectarian ethnic quotas, which really prevented the Iraqis from establishing a presence in the political and social space away from discrimination. Now, despite all of that, there is a struggle that has been taking place more clearly since February 2011, in order to consolidate actual democracy at the political Yes, I'm sorry about that. Now, just like I said, despite all of that, there is a struggle to consolidate actual democracy on both levels, political and social levels, in order to take that opportunity from these sectarian forces that really plagued the country with conflicts and sectarian wars that later on caused the fall of three largest cities in Iraq, which are because of ISIS, who killed hundreds of peoples, and they displaced nearly 3 million citizens internally and externally. Not to mention that there is a lot of corruption and a waste for public money. Now, Iraqis realize that democracy does not mean submission and silence over the imbalances and transgressions in its path. Rather, it is required to speak out in the struggle and to reform and to modify the wrong approaches and practices. Therefore, the most appropriate method of struggle was through peaceful protest to fundamentally reform the political system and demand the achievement of social justice and inequality, pressure to end foreign interferences, and also holding those who are involved in the corruption accountable for their actions, and also meeting the basic needs of individuals and tackling poverty and crime and ensuring that people would get their rights. Now, the Iraqis believe that through the continuous daily struggle, that democracy today must be linked to the strength and also the immunity of the nation, and its ability to guarantee freedom for all of the components of the country, and to empower people regardless of their orientations, their convictions and beliefs, and grant them the opportunity to construct the country, and to resolutely confront the tendencies and the extremist nihilistic propositions that do not believe in difference, diversity, and pluralism. And that the alternative to the sectarian quota system is a product of a brave and continuous struggle that wages all believers in political and social democracy in Iraq. Thank you very much for listening.
Un abbraccio a tutti i compagni e compagne dell'Iraq.
To hug all the comrades from you. Samia, are you there? We haven't seen you, Samia. Are you there? If you're not there, Samia, we move to the next session on wars and disarmament. And I'd like to call my colleague to replace me as moderator. Thank you, Raffaella. Good morning, everyone. This is a session which concerns peace, war, disarmament, occupation, resistance, has three speakers. One, former comrade promoting peace from the United States, Phyllis Bennis from the Institute for Policy Studies of Washington. She was one of the leading figures of the fight against the war in the United States at a world level. She was with us in the major demonstration against the war in Iraq. Then we have Anan Azal Koyunquer, who is getting here because he lives in Italy, so join us. She's an activist. She's the spokesperson for the Kurdish community, for the Rojava community in Italy, who works in Milan as a consultant for immigration. We then have a dear friend and comrade from Palestine, Anan Kaoud. She's a feminist. I've met her in Ramallah in the association, which was founded by the Hana Shawi. She's a research worker. She worked for UN on women. It's a UN center working with women. And I'd like to wish to her and to all the other Muslims the Eid Mubarak. It's the first day of the great celebration, Muslim celebration.
Thank you.
Are recreating the excitement, passion, and yes, power. Against humanity. And in response, on dear friends, dear comrades, it's great to see that you are recreating the excitement, the passion, and yes, the power of Genoa in 2001. It was a time, it was a moment, it was the height of a global movement. 20 years later, there's really no question about whether we need to build and improve our convergences, our connections, our intersectional links
Fine ha parlato a fine della necessità